you can access them at a later stage. And we also put the PowerPoints up there as well, so you've got access to remind yourself as you're going through. So today we're talking about change of minds, or psychological perceptions. And I guess it's really, we have habits, we have ways of interacting, we have interactions with people. Some of those are successful, some of those aren't successful. But I guess we are who we are, and our behaviour is within our control. Other people's behaviour is not. But we can certainly influence other people's behaviour by our interactions and understanding ourselves. A couple of my favourite sayings: to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom, is what Socrates said, which is really saying that know yourself, understand yourself, because that then allows you to model or view other people's behaviour. Because I mean, if you look at yourself as a model of behaviour and then start to view how other people are interacting and what have you, it starts to give you the answers of how they're thinking about things. So Lao Tzu said, knowing others is intelligence, knowing yourself is true wisdom, mastering others is strength, and mastering yourself is true power. So we do have the power to be and do the best we are at any stage, and it's usually the way we interpret the world and we present and interact with it that is holding us back. So we're literally our own worst enemies. So in this session, we're going to talk about how do we perceive the world. We're going to talk about how do we change our thoughts, which thoughts are the basis of our actions, and looking at whether we're in a growth or survival mode, and then some tools to reframe your thoughts every day. So, I mean, it's a half-hour presentation, so obviously we're not going to go into enormous detail on these kind of things. So, I mean, we always encourage, if you're struggling to, I guess, move to the next level on certain areas, and you kind of having trouble kind of shifting your thinking and what have you, that's where a coach can be really handy, a coach or a mentor. And as we're going through these sessions, I mean, we'll be talking about blind spots, we'll be talking about, I guess, repetitive behavior and things that aren't always successful for you. Engaging other people to assist you through that is always very, very helpful. Trying to change your behavior just by yourself without looking at the consequences, and I'm talking about positive, negative, and without interacting with other people who can remind you about various things, it's quite difficult. So no man or woman is an island.
So how do we perceive the world? Well, I mean, you've probably seen the old iceberg model many, many times, but really at the top of that is our behaviours, and this is what people see, and a lot of it's based on stimuli. In other words, the events that are occurring to us, but how do we respond to those stimuli is what's going on under the surface. And it really starts off right at that base level there. We have base core needs, and nature, nurture is, you know, where the input for that might be. But we do have some absolute core beliefs about ourselves, and we'll talk about a little bit down the track, because I mean, some of those core beliefs are damaged in some way, or they're generated in a way that's not factual and not helpful moving forward. As we're moving up through the surface, then you have your values and beliefs. And these things are, I guess, the information, the inputs from your parents, demographics, where you went to school, religion, relationships, things like that, where I start to think in terms of this is right, this is wrong. I made one of my favorite sayings. I just can't think of who said it this time, but it's the universal human paradigm. There are the way things should be and the way things shouldn't be. And if they're not, there's something wrong with me, them, or it. So in other words, we do drop things into right and wrong, yes or no. And if it doesn't fit that, we are looking for reasons for that. We forget that that basic assumption may not be valid. Then we move through the thinking and feeling phase. So in that current situation, how is my mind reacting to this? How is my body reacting to this? And what am I making sense of it? Then we move to the topic and we're back to what other people see. So we are complex animals, but when we see behavior, we are looking down into a base need. So it is a window all the way to the bottom of that iceberg. When we see people behave in certain ways and we think, that's an interesting reaction to that. And it may even be a reaction that is totally suboptimal to all parties, including themselves in that current situation. You've got to ask yourself, what is the base need this person is meeting here? And as I say, those needs, this sequence, as I keep on saying to people, because it's built on rocky information at times, it may appear logical, but it doesn't appear, it is not factual. So in a strange way, it has a logic to it, but it's not based on necessarily based on facts. And that logic sometimes is lost and other people looking in. So for the individual that's behaving a certain way, there's a very clear drive to meet a need. For other people looking in, they may not see what that clear line is, and it starts to come across as dysfunctional in some way. So this is a very busy slide, I understand, and I guess it's another extension of what we were just talking about. You do have a set of core beliefs. And as I was saying, cognitive behavioral therapy and what have you looks at, summarizes it down and says, well, where people are, I guess their base need, when they're slightly askew, they're usually relating to either they have a sense that they're unlovable, and they have a sense they may be unworthy, or they have a sense of helplessness. And cognitive behavioral therapy looks at that and says, okay, well, that kind of misinterpretation of the environment is then driving some behaviors through to, or driving needs that are moving through to certain behaviors. We start to make assumptions, attitudes, and rules around those core beliefs. And as I say, if they're built on strong positive, that flows through to a positive outcome. If they're built on interrupted or misguided self-belief, then those rules and assumptions start to become a little skewed. If they are a little skewed, we then start to build in coping strategy, including a need to feel relatedness, certainty, autonomy, those type of things, where we are now starting to build what you've probably heard as being triggers. In other words, now I have some rules and assumptions that protect myself. I'm rolling those out. When they're under attack or under perceived attack, I go into coping strategy. Then you're in that conversation. If you don't check, you will respond in an automatic fashion. So you have some automatic thoughts and behavior that's rolling through straight based on those core beliefs. If those core beliefs in that particular environment are good and strong, that'll be positive. If they're based on things that are skewed, then those automatic responses, unchecked, can be seen as other people as a little bit odd. We add meaning to those automatic thoughts, and I guess the frightening thing about it is we also start to filter and look for confirmations. You've heard the term confirmation bias. So when I have those automatic thoughts that are based on untested assumptions about myself, then I'm starting to look for all the evidence that supports that, and I'm starting to even ignore it to the point where I'm not even consciously ignoring it. I'm just not working its way through that filter system. I have emotional and physical response to those triggers that are coming in, and then you're seeing the behavior. Now, all this could happen in a microsecond. So you may have a conversation with someone and you say something, and I've certainly felt it, and I would be surprised if you haven't, where suddenly that conversation, you've said something completely innocent, and that conversation has just done a 180, and suddenly you find yourself in a difficult conversation. You're wondering to yourself, how did we get to this point where we're now having an argument? And then what you may do is start to contribute to that by going in defensive mode, and then we end up with this cycle. But that's the subject of our having challenging, difficult conversations webinar, which I'm sure you'll dial into at a later stage. So there's lots going on there. I mean, David Rock, I quite like this because it summarizes some of the negative core response behaviors. So going back to that cognitive behavioral therapy, it's looking at those negative core beliefs that can fall into three basic categories. I'm feeling helpless in the world, I'm feeling unlovable, or I'm worthless. And that flows into then what I see as social threats and rewards. In other words, I'm leaning towards, and David Rock is summarizing in the SCARF model in one of these five, and it's not one or the other. It can be a mixture of these things, but I'm looking for certain triggers, if you like. And I do say looking for them because consciously or not, I'm filtering out the things that don't support my thesis or hypothesis about myself, and I'm looking for things that do support that hypothesis about myself. And as I said, David Rock sits them into five categories, whether it relates to status, in other words, how we perceive our position in relation to others. And I guess managers, if you feel like where I separate managers from leaders, managers may be caught in that status. So anything that threatens their job title, anything that threatens their recognition or position in life starts to become a trigger. Leadership is about having or building relationships with people. So that may not be what the trigger is for them. Certainty is about, I understand, I have a good view of what's going on. I would see myself fall into this trap as well. I see myself where I have my day laid out and it's interrupted in certain ways. And if I feel myself being slightly triggered there with that. But other people, that may not be of concern to them, but that certainty is something that a lot of people are attaching themselves to. Autonomy, that need for control, that not wanting to be micromanaged, not wanting to be controlled in some way is a trigger for somebody. See, the reverse of this, and especially if you're running out some change programs or anything like that, is if you could get a bit of a sense as to what some people's triggers are, if you meet that, you're going to get a positive response out of that as well. So this isn't just about the negative side of it. If you're working with people and working in a change program, the other side of this is about rewards. But at the moment, we're really talking about psychological perceptions. Relatedness is concerns with the quality of relationships and the sense of belonging with other people. And fairness is a sense of justice of right and wrong. And I'll tell you a story about that fairness. I have a very, very good example of that as we move through there. So what I guess for some of you, and where I'm going with this, is really sort of saying we have lots of things going on in the background. We have a lot of programming going on, which we at times don't really question. And when push comes to shove, sometimes we retreat into these areas. We are now in protection and security mode, and we will do that certainly at the expense of the relationship with others if we don't stop and think about our actions. And let's face it, we on a day-to-day basis, we're not constantly monitoring everything we say and do. But getting back to sort of saying, well, okay, if I feel I'm triggered in some way, do a little bit of self-exploration. And that's going back to Lao Tzu and Socrates saying, do you understand yourself? Do you understand what starts to drive some behavior which, if you look at it pragmatically, doesn't quite make sense to the stimuli that's being applied in that situation? So some of you would have seen the ladder of inference has been around for very many years, but we have any kind of real data and experience. And this is what really happens. From then, straight away, we now start to create a perceived reality, which is based on our perception of the world. One of the examples I like to give, if you're sitting and you're looking out a window and you see an older man who looks a bit scruffy staggering down the road and then falls over. Okay, that is a real observation. But what happens next around that really depends on your perception of it. So you may think that, oh my goodness, he's had a heart attack and he's had some health issues. You may even think this person just drunk at 10 o'clock in the morning. You may go and help the person, but I mean, there are situations where people are falling down and no one's even stopped to check they're okay, which, I mean, that's a different symptom. The description of that escapes me just at the moment. But we select data and experiences, and we have a massive filter system because we cannot possibly take in all the information we have. So we have almost pre-programmed that filter system. We start to fix meaning to it. Is this a threat or a benefit to me? We start to make assumptions on that, and we start to think we know what other motivations of people are. And I guess one of the stop points here I'll just cover off on. I had one of my mentors say to me, Peter, there are probably two buckets that people fall into straight away when you see something where you think it's affecting you negatively. In other words, it's some kind of threat to me. It's either we tend to go straight away that it's malicious intent, but he said the other bucket is just incompetence or misunderstanding. His view was always put it in the incompetence or misunderstanding bucket before you put it in the malicious bucket. But we do have a tendency when we see behavior, we see the way our kids interact, or we have someone who's working with us or for us that behaves in a way, sometimes we automatically put in that into the malicious bucket, and that drives we drive conclusions out of that. And it must be this way, it must be that way. It forms our belief. If it fits with our broader belief of the situation, that becomes something that reinforces our previous understanding, which, as I say, we started off with an independent event, then we do something, we take action on that. Now, you need to stop and interrupt this ladder of inference at various points on the way through. Right from the beginning there, real data experience, have you got enough? Or are you just making some selections on that input and working on that? Or are you going back and looking at that real data experience and saying, what's really going on here? When you affix meaning to it, okay, is that a valid meaning? What are the assumptions you're making about the motivation of others? Are your conclusions valid? And if you take action, is it the right action to take for that independent situation? Because we don't like to think, we like to roll in models. So we like to make very, very quick assumptions about that. And that leads on to, say, Daniel Canahan. We'll talk about that shortly. So we have somewhere between 60 and 70,000 thoughts a day, of which 90% of them are the same. So in other words, we are rolling through patterns of behavior. And our patterns of behavior are being built over the full extension of our lives. An interesting fact, the English language has approximately 3,000 words that describe emotion, and there are nearly twice as many words for negative emotions as there are for positive ones. Research shows 70% of people tend to focus on negative emotions more frequently. So we tend to move toward the negative. In other words, we protect ourselves in a greater extent than we move towards the positives. So we almost pre-program for survival. But if you want to move from survival into growth, then you need to start looking at the positive emotions more frequently. So when we react emotionally to a situation, we actually start to create a chemical change in our body. And that chemical change is starting to program us down that path. As I said, we don't want to have to solve our day-to-day problems, our minute-to-minute problems over and over again. We're just making some massive assumptions. And sometimes those massive assumptions are built on some really rocky, untested hypothesis. As I was saying to you, Daniel Kahneman, this is a fantastic book. It's reasonably thick. I thought it would be academic, but I found quite the opposite. Thinking fast and slow. And he's saying there are two systems in our brains constantly fighting control of our behavior and actions. And this leads to many errors in judgment, decisions, and memory. So your behaviors are determined by the two systems. One's conscious and one is automatic. The system one, automatic and impulsive, system two is conscious, aware, and considerate. Your brain is lazy. We use up an enormous amount of calories by solving problems. So we, as animals, to survive, have built a system where we minimize the amount of calories we use. So your brain will revert to system one very, very quickly. So how do you differentiate where you can and can't trust your gut feeling and act in a more mindful way and make better decisions? Well, I guess it's then starting to separate out, well, what are the outcomes and consequences, and starting to learn where you need to use your conscious awareness and consideration, and where you can rely on your automatic and impulsive responses to things. So Mr. Goldsmith, what got us here won't get us there. And Albert Einstein, I don't think Albert Einstein actually said this, but it's certainly always been attributed to him. But insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. And I guess when you have patterns of behavior that have worked for you, what I see with a lot of people, if I start to put some pressure on them, and let's face it, we've all been under an enormous amount of pressure over the last couple of years, when I start, they won't get creative to think, how can I solve this problem in a different way? What people tend to do is dig in and try and deliver what's always worked for them in the past more forcefully. In other words, this has worked for me, it's not working now, I need to do more of it. Okay, I need to do more of it. And you're starting to see some very, very extreme behaviors, which from a pragmatic outsider point of view, really do not make a lot of sense. And someone has just caught themselves in this circular trap of trying to get a different result from the same activity. Now, we are all triggered, and different things will trigger us in different ways. And the extent of that trigger really depends on how you interact. And this is another extension, I guess, another way of looking at that ladder of inference. So where it really starts off at zero is starting to feel a body sensation. Now, you usually feel that or have that body sensation before you move into feelings and thoughts. So maybe sweaty palms, and maybe, this doesn't quite feel right. Maybe you're feeling something to building up inside you where you're now moving into that feelings where it's, you're not in a good place. And then you're starting to make assessments around that where the thought kicks in and then the behavior fires off. If these triggers are negative, and certainly working with people, it really starts to accelerate in the last 20%. So if you're reacting to any kind of situation where you feel yourself and now starting to behave in a way that is not helpful to the situation, I can just about guarantee you that that started way, way back. So you've been invited to a meeting. You've got something controversial to talk about in that meeting. I would suggest your body sensation is starting to trigger there, where now you start to have feelings, this isn't going to go good. How am I going to protect myself here? You go into that meeting, maybe it rolls out exactly the way you predicted it rolled out, and suddenly now your behavior at that top 80%, top 20% is now dysfunctional for the intentions or the environment you're operating in. So starting to identify triggers right back at the point of body sensation and feeling is important, because that's a point where you can have that opportunity to make a different choice or to suspend your disbelief. I have a really, really nice example of this, working with a lady recently. And she, with some self-belief about inadequacies, or really was didn't think she was good enough, didn't think that she, I guess low self-esteem is probably the best way to sum that up. And interacting with people and going into meetings and what have you, and feeling, she could feel that body sensation and feeling coming through, started to reinforce those thoughts of self-belief, negative thoughts of self-belief. And then the behavior that other people saw was either withdrawing with that or being a little bit aggressive with that. And they tend to come from nowhere. And interrupting that thought pattern, going back and saying, okay, well, you may have some self-confidence issues there, but they are triggering now behavior that is damaging your relationship with other people. And the issue with that is that if I'm damaging the relationship with other people, I'm not an island. So other people are now modifying their behavior as they interact with me. So if I'm going and meeting with someone who I know is cranky, or I know is on the edge of being dysfunctional in their relationships, I'm starting now to modify my behavior for that situation as well. So you end up with this vicious cycle of feeding off the other people. So you're starting to feel the triggers going to a meeting, but other people who are meeting with you are having those same kind of triggers. So you're coming into that negative environment. Someone needs to break that cycle, because otherwise, if that just continues on, your own perception of how people interact with you is being reinforced as negative for extended periods of time. I don't like people, or they don't like me. They're some of the things you might be saying to yourself. So your every interaction comes across to someone else as suspicious and self-guarding. And your interactions, because they're responding to you in a negative way, are now self-protecting as well. So how do I break that cycle? Well, we'll revisit that in a second. So you can train your brain to think about a situation differently. You need to describe it to yourself differently. Transformational vocabulary, the words we employ to describe our experiences, actually define that experience. I certainly know from it. Sometimes I wake up and a couple of days later, I think to myself, was that a dream? Was that real? I mean, there's lots of research done on sports people who thinking through things is almost the same as actually doing them. And I play a musical instrument. If I can imagine myself playing that instrument through in my head, note for note, I can play it. If I can't think about playing that through note for note, I know I can't play it. So it's a the brain is not separating thoughts and experiences as well as you may think it is. So how can you change your vocabulary in a way that manages your emotions? The secret is using strong words of positive emotion and less intense words for negative emotions. Going back to my example previously with my lady, my coach, she was really saying to her, all right, at that particular point in time, stop. What I want you to do is suspend that disbelief of malicious intent. Just a short little phrase, so that was her checkpoint to sort of say, stop. Okay, I'm in a situation here, I'm bringing something to it, I'm getting something from it, but I can stop that. So I'm going to suspend my disbelief or my belief of malicious intent. And her reports back to me were almost transformational for her in terms of her relationships at work, socially, and at home, where I'm going into a situation where I'm not thinking someone's trying to do something to trip me up or trying to do something to upset me. I'm now walking in that situation and saying, I'm going to suspend that belief of malicious intent, and I'm going to interact in a positive way, and I'll see where that goes. And that has really transformed the way she's interacting. So change that story. Words you habitually use to choose affect the way you communicate with yourself and others. How you think about yourself is how you project yourself to the world. If you're negative and you're using negative words about yourself and you're using them, they are portrayed. People can see through that. If you think poorly about yourself when you're put in social situations, people start to see through that. They're much more perceptive than you think. So simply changing your habitual vocabulary, the words you consistently use, will change how you feel about yourself and how you live. So a little exercise, should you choose to take it on, write down some disempowering words you use that make you feel bad or make you feel bad about yourself, and start to use some new empowering words that can interrupt that pattern and make you feel better, and try practicing those. I mean, this interruption of thought, you know, I use it, and I'll give you some examples of it. There can be various things. I was working with a fellow who found himself, when work started to pile in, he was in a very senior role, work started to pile in, he could feel himself being triggered. He'd come in the morning and he could feel the work coming in, they were interrupting his activities and what have you. So we went and bought him a little red bucket, and we put it on his desk to remind him when that bucket started to fill that he emptied the bucket and started again, which then reset his trigger emotion. As I said, in terms of another lady, that willing suspension of disbelief was a set of words just that caused her to stop that negative cycle. Working with another fellow in oil and gas, he was a very interesting one. He really saw an issue with fairness. He would be going into any kind of situation. If he didn't perceive it as being fair, that really triggered him. And there's a very nice video, and you just can look it up on YouTube on rhesus monkeys on fairness, look it up. And it basically shows that whole sense of fairness really goes back to primates as a whole. But he started thinking through that short video just as his check. I have cyclist friends who say to themselves when they hit the hills and hit the wind, I love the wind, I love the hills. You know, that's just changed the vocabulary. I mean, there's the one they teach school kids now. You know, this is simple, this is easy, this is fun. When you're facing something that maybe you don't want to do or you think is a little bit challenging. I know someone who's a real people pleaser, and their checkpoint is to stop and say, would this person do the same for me? So that they're not over delivering and having expectations of, because people pleasing has expectations of a return. So if you're checking that right at the beginning, I mean, presenters sitting back and saying, when you're nervous about presenting, so I am enough. They may be the 3 words that just check their empowering words, and the words you use. So saying things to yourself like, you idiot, and that's a stupid thing to do, or whatever, those kind of things are not helpful, and they don't grow you. They diminish you. They stop you from taking risks that will help grow. And metaphors are the same, you know, that's a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object which is not literally applicable. You know, you're a moron, you're an idiot, you're stupid, those kind of things. So what are the metaphors that you link to relationships? Are they empowering? Are they disempowering? I'm talking about your work, you know, this guy's as slow as a wet week, you know, those type of things. They're metaphors, but they're describing, and if they're negative, they're disempowering. So changing some of these metaphors you use, and just even if you start with a couple of them, and I always say to people, don't try and change the world in a week. Start to look at 1 or 2 things, even if it's just one thing, and say, I'm going to change this. I mean, at one stage there, years and years ago, I used to have a little sign on the side of my desk that said, sit down, shut up and listen, you might learn something. And it was just that constant reminder when I felt myself having to engage where it was unnecessary, where I could sit back and it changed my behavior. And it certainly had a completely different impact on the relationships I had with myself and with other people. So successful people understand themselves and how their behaviors affect others, understand their reactions to other people, know how to maximize what they do well, have a healthy attitude about themselves, and know how to adapt their behavior. And understanding yourself, once you start to understand yourself, then you understand other people. You can't understand other people if you don't understand yourself. And understanding other people is leading, developing relationships. It's about negotiating a best result. It's about being the authentic you. So reframe the thoughts, recognize. Do you understand and recognize what your triggers are? Do you understand the early warning signs? Select some of those triggers to grow, and look at your breathing, your posture, the way you're thinking. Respond, redirect your responses, and start to develop some of those new habits around your automatic responses, or even the responses you understand. I mean, sometimes these triggers you completely understand, and to a certain way, they're feeding almost like a positive. I need to get angry about this because it makes me feel good when I'm angry about it. But as I say, the impact you're having on the people around you isn't going to help you grow as a person. So that's 9:35. We're coming to the end of this session. So in summary, to change your mind, you should become conscious of your unconscious thoughts, your actions and emotions. Use a phrase or statement to quickly refrain. I mean, there's another beautiful, like it's a Bob Newhart. If you go and look at the Stop It video, Bob New on YouTube, that's a fantastic example of rephrasing something. Using mental rehearsals, especially when you're going into a meeting or going into any kind of situation where you feel you may be triggered, even as you sense that feeling and that physical response to it. Change your metaphors. Whoop, I'm sorry. Can I go back? change your metaphors, change your descriptive language, and you really need to put some time and effort into it if you want to make it a habit moving forward. Okay, so I guess that's the key to it. You having those visual reminders, those mental reminders, whatever it is that you are consciously, because we are developing these auto responses. They have been the habits we developed over years. They do need attention to change, and it's not impossible. And once you start to change them, and you've successfully done that once or twice, it starts to become very, very easy. It's almost like a domino effect. Okay, so let me see. We're on to questions. Okay, let me have a look and see what we've got. So, Charlene, do we have any questions at the moment?
Not at the moment, Peter.
Okay, no problems. As I say, I find this subject very, very interesting. And as I say, understanding yourself, you really start to see how other people are interacting and reacting to you. And it's a very powerful tool to have in leadership and management, and will really build solid relationships home, socially, and at work. So I think at that stage we're done for the day. So we will send out copies of this presentation, and it'll go up on YouTube so you can review that or share it with your friends. And so Peter James is my name from Career Life Transitions. Please feel free to give us a call or send us an email if you want more information or would like any additional or have any additional questions or anything about the session this morning. So have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thank you.